Welcome back. Just a quick reminder that I have a few slots available for chess lessons. You can find out more on chessopenings.com/lessons. Welcome back to chessopenings.com. Today's video takes a look at a fast-paced blitz game in which I'm playing black against a Carlsbad structure of the Queen's Gambit declined. This is going to give us a chance to look at some of the basic tactics and strategies of the Carlsbad opening, which we also have an app for in the iPhone and Android store. Let's begin taking a look at the game. Welcome back to chessopenings.com. In today's video, we'll take a look at a blitz game, which I played with a player on the Internet Chess Club, that's chessclub.com, and at the time the player was rated about the same as my rating. I was handling the black pieces, and my opponent opened up with the move pawn to d4. And now I replied with the move knight to f6, white continued knight to f3, and now pawn to d5. And after the move pawn to c4 and pawn to e6, we have a position which is known as the Queen's Gambit declined. Now, the Queen's Gambit declined is a fairly solid opening, and black profits from the fact that white has already committed his knight to the f3 square, especially if white plays the move knight to c3, which is what was played here. Another setup which white has at his disposal is the move pawn to g3, leading to the Catalan variation. But in this game, my opponent chose the move knight c3, and both of these are fairly popular. And from here, black has a few different moves which he can play to get a decent position. One being bishop to b4, another being bishop to e7, another move being pawn to c5. All of these moves are possible, even d takes c4 has been played. But I went with the standard move, bishop to e7. And now from here, I think white's best chances for the advantage involve the move bishop to e4 and pawn to e3. The move bishop to g5 is also a main line, but there are many variations which have been worked out to close to a draw in this variation. But instead of playing bishop to f4, my opponent played the move pawn takes pawn on d5, pawn takes pawn on d5 was played, and now this position leads to what appears to be very similar to the Carlsbad variation. And the Carlsbad variation is a variation of the Queen's Gambit decline that I've done quite a bit of analysis on and even published an application for the iPhone and for Android based solely upon this variation. However, there's one key difference in this position, and this is that white has already used a tempo to bring his knight to the f3 square, and usually white would reserve this tempo and use it to more quickly occupy this diagonal, the b1 to h7 diagonal, with pieces so that black doesn't have a chance to play the move bishop to f5. But here, because he's wasted a move on knight to f3, and he still needs to get his bishop out before he can play e3, and in this game he played bishop to f4, because he's already devoted that tempo to knight to f3, now black has time to bring his bishop to f5. Now, first of all, I played pawn to c6, and now even if white plays queen to c2, I'll still go ahead and play g6, e3, bishop f5, bishop d3, and exchange off my light squared bishop, which just so happens to be the bishop which is on the same colored squares as my pawns. Additionally, white has traded off the bishop that is on the opposite color of his pawns, and so this is a fairly nice exchange for black, and in general, black has a slight plus score in positions just like these simply because he's managed to trade off the light squared bishops. In fact, something very similar to this happened in the game with pawn to e3, bishop to f5, bishop to d3. First of all, we had the move c6 in here, c6, e3, bishop to f5, bishop to d3, and then the exchange of bishops on the d3 square. And again, this is a favorable exchange for black, because he's managed to get rid of his light squared bishop in exchange for white's light squared bishop. Not only does this leave him with a little bit more flexibility for the development of his queenside pieces, but also, very interestingly, black has the potential of playing for the e4 square. I continued with knight bd7, castles kingside, h3, rook to e8. And so one plan in this position is to play moves like knight to f8, bishop to d6, getting the bishop out of the way of the rook. And then at the right time, I can occupy the e4 square with my knight and kind of gum up the position in the center quite a bit, and even create chances of an eventual kingside attack thanks to the advanced placement of this knight on e4. This never quite turned out in the game, but oftentimes this ends up being one of the significant dangers that white faces when he allows these light-squared bishops to be traded off in the Carlsbad variation. So my opponent continued with the move rook a to b1. I continued pawn to a5. Rook fc1 was played. Knight to f8. Knight e5. And now bishop d6, just intending to bring about another imbalance by capturing this knight. a3. White is planning to bring this pawn up to b4 and then to b5 and trade on c6. Bishop takes e5. D takes e5 was played. So I was expecting my opponent to play the move bishop takes e5, knight g6 I would play, bishop retreats, queen to e7, and again I'm ready to occupy the e4 square with a knight, and I really think that black's position is quite solid. Maybe it's about equal here, but let's say that white continues with b4, takes, knight e4. In general, it's going to be hard for white to achieve a long-lasting attack here. For example, if he plays b5, rook a3 will cause him some problems. Usually, white has maneuvers like knight a4 to c5, but here this is not possible because of the open a file. And there's just lots of reasons to expect that black should have no particular problem handling this position. But the move d takes e5 also doesn't seem like a great idea, because now this pawn is actually weak. So I played knight 6 to d7, queen d4, knight g6, and already the pawn on e5 cannot be defended a third time, and it's being attacked 3 times. So knight g6 was played, knight to a4, and it was time to simply capture this pawn. Knight g takes e5, reserving my knight for the defense of the c5 square, and in fact, he infiltrated with knight c5. I exchanged off the knight. And now he captured with bishop takes e5, a slightly unexpected move here, which maybe should have allowed the move knight to b3 in this position. Not quite sure why I didn't recognize that during the game. Instead, I simply played the move knight to e6. This is a mistake. Queen to c3 was played, pawn to c5, bishop to g3, pawn to b6, pawn to b4 was played, a takes b4, and pawn to c4. So both sides are clearly making quite a few mistakes in this game. Both players are rated around 2,000 on the ICC 5-minute pool. Now, of course, I'm rated about 150 points higher than that USCF. So the 5-minute pool on ICC is a little bit underrated compared to the United States Chess Federation rating, so both players are pretty solid experts here. But it's important to point out that in Blitz games, players make simple tactical mistakes all the time. And also in tournament games, players make simple tactical mistakes all the time. And this game is going to give us a lot of examples of different kinds of opportunities that were missed by both sides. So white now continues with pawn to b5, knight to c5 was played. Excellent turnout from the strategy for black in the opening here. Now this knight is headed to the d3 square, or the b3 square, or the e4 square. And again, this definitely is not what white was hoping for in the Carlsbad variation. And it just so happens that he's also dropped a pawn. Now, interestingly, white played the move bishop to e5, creating some complications in this position, allowing me to play knight to d3, attacking both the bishop and c1, but now capturing on g7. Knight takes c1 was played, rook takes c1, queen to g5. Black should definitely be better in this position, but it's going to take a little bit of work. as white continued with the move bishop to d4. And now, if I had this to play all over again, I would probably go for the move rook to e6, and then maybe rook to g6 at the same time defending the b6 pawn. But my real concern was how to get this c pawn moving up the board, and so I played the move rook to a5, intending to capture here and bring the rook to b3. And this is slightly off task here. I believe rook e6 would have been stronger. White continued with queen to b4. Being up the exchange, I started to play for the queen exchange. Queen e7, queen b2, queen a3. Again, I feel like black is going a little bit in the wrong direction here. But queen c2 was played. Now, it appears that black can simply take on b5, but again, I was mostly consumed with centralizing my queen and preventing his queen from coming to the f5 square. But analysis shows that I can definitely play rook takes b5, because presently, the queen is stuck to the rook with check. Queen f5, queen takes c1 check, king h2, king f8. White actually has no checks here, and after queen takes h7, queen to a3, even though white has the chance of creating a couple checks, the two rooks versus bishop will be sufficient, and white cannot make a perpetual check. But because I was worried about this idea, I played queen to d3, queen b2 was played. Now, again, rook e6 is probably the best way to continue, but instead I played rook to c8. And finally, white gets some serious chances with this excellent move, bishop to h8, threatening to play mate. Now I continued with pawn to c3, trying to cut this plan off. Rook takes c3 was played. Rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, rook takes b5, queen to a3, and now I played rook to a5. And interestingly, white at the last moment misses a chance to draw the game. Again, this was a blitz game. But had white continued with the move queen to d6, threatening to play queen d8, which would be mate in this position, now, even if I capture the bishop with queen takes c3, there's perpetual check with queen to d8, queen to g5. And back and forth, white can go with these moves. And apparently, there's actually no simple way for black to get out of this problem, because the queen is also threatening to come to the g3 square with strong counterplay. And so, in fact, the position would be equal had white played queen d6. But instead, white simply buckles under the pressure. He plays bishop takes a5, and black captured the queen on a3, and white immediately resigned. Now, this game gives us some interesting perspectives into the Carlsbad Variation. White did not manage to get any of the typical strategic ideas that he should be playing for in the Carlsbad Variation, and this was in large part due to the fact that black was able to create this exchange of bishops. Now, I highly recommend the Carlsbad application because there we explore how white can go for these positions, and we also talk a lot about why the move knight to f3 cannot be played so early as white did in this game. So handling the black pieces, I did quite nicely, got a nice position, but then a number of tactical mistakes were made by both sides. And I think the takeaway in this kind of game is always remember that Kasparov said, chess is won by the player who makes the second to last mistake, which means that all games are littered with all kinds of mistakes, and as long as we're vigilant and paying attention, there are going to be many opportunities to exploit lots of things. In this case, white missed a draw at the end, black missed a fork of some pieces at some point, white blundered a pawn. Lots of different things were going on here, but this is not at all unusual, and throughout this Blitz series, we're going to see lots and lots of examples of this kind of thing happening. Thanks a lot for watching. I certainly enjoyed this, and I hope that you have as well, and that you found it instructive. That's all for today, and we'll see you again soon. Before you go, if you have an opportunity, be sure to check out that we have 3 applications available on the Queen's Gambit Decline, available for iPhone and for Android. Check them out.